The morning sun painted the military base in shades of gold and amber as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez walked across the parade ground. Her Marine dress blues crisp despite the early hour. At 28, she had already earned more respect than most soldiers saw in their entire careers, but today felt different. Today, the weight of her uniform seemed heavier, and the familiar sounds of military life around her felt distant. Maria had been stationed at Camp Pendleton for 3 years now, but she still remembered her first day like it was yesterday. Fresh out of boot camp, she had been determined to prove herself in a world where being a woman meant fighting twice as hard for half the recognition. She had done everything right, excelled in training, followed orders without question, and earned the respect of her fellow Marines through sheer determination and skill. But respect, she had learned, was a fragile thing. The incident that would change everything started on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday. Maria was heading to the communications center to deliver a classified report when she noticed a commotion near the barracks. A group of Marines had gathered around something, their voices raised in what sounded like heated discussion. As she approached, she could make out the center of attention, a young recruit, probably no more than 18, who was being pushed around by Corporal Jake Matthews. Matthews was known throughout the base as someone who believed in the old ways, where hierarchy meant everything and showing weakness was unforgivable. "You think you belong here, Garcia?" Matthews was saying to the young Marine, whose name tag read PFC Garcia. "You think because you made it through boot camp, you're one of us?" Garcia was trying to stand his ground, but Maria could see the fear in his eyes. She had been in his position once, facing down bullies who thought they could break her spirit. The memory of her own struggles came flooding back. The nights she had cried herself to sleep, questioning whether she was strong enough, whether she belonged. "Earn my place here, Corporal," Garcia said, his voice shaking slightly but holding steady. "Same as everyone else." Matthews laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the morning air. "Earned? You haven't earned anything, boy. You're just another weak link that's going to get real Marines killed." That was when Maria stepped forward. She had always believed in standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves, and something about Garcia reminded her of herself at that age, determined but vulnerable, trying so hard to fit in. "Is there a problem here, Corporal Matthews?" she asked, her voice carrying the authority that came with her rank and experience. Matthews turned to look at her, and she saw something in his eyes that she didn't like. It wasn't just disrespect. It was something deeper, something that spoke to the very reason she had to fight so hard to be taken seriously. "No problem, Rodriguez," he said, emphasizing her last name in a way that made it sound like an insult. "Just teaching the new guy some lessons about what it means to be a real Marine." Maria felt her jaw tighten. She had heard variations of this conversation before, usually directed at her. The implication was always the same. Some people belonged, and others didn't, and the decision about who fit into which category wasn't based on merit or performance. "Private Garcia has completed the same training as the rest of us," she said calmly. "He's earned the right to wear that uniform." "Has he?" Matthews stepped closer, and Maria could smell the aggression rolling off him like heat from asphalt. "And what about you, Rodriguez? What have you really earned?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, the other Marines had gone quiet, sensing that this conversation had moved beyond Garcia and into territory that was far more dangerous. Maria had faced this question in 100 different forms throughout her career. Every promotion, every commendation, every assignment had come with whispered suggestions that she hadn't really earned it, that she was there to fill some quota or satisfy some political requirement. She had learned to ignore most of it, to focus on her performance, and let her work speak for itself. But something about this moment felt different. Maybe it was the way Matthews was looking at her, like she was something that had crawled out from under a rock. Maybe it was the fact that Garcia was watching, his young face full of hope that someone would stand up for what was right. Or maybe it was just that she was tired of proving herself over and over again, tired of having to justify her presence in every room she entered. "I've earned everything I have, Corporal," she said, her voice steady but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "My record speaks for itself." Matthews smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Does it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've gotten by on being different, not being better." The words hit her like a physical blow. She had heard them before, but never stated so directly, never with such casual cruelty. For a moment, She felt like that scared young recruit again, wondering if she really belonged, if she was really good enough. But then she looked at Garcia, saw the way he was watching her, waiting to see if she would back down. She thought about all the young Marines who would come after her, all the people who needed to see that it was possible to stand up and fight back. "My different is what makes me better," she said quietly. "I've had to work twice as hard to get half as far, and that's made me stronger than you'll ever be." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Matthews's face was turning red, and Maria could see his hands clenching into fists. She knew she had pushed him too far, but she also knew she couldn't back down now. "You think you're better than me?" Matthews asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You think because you wear the same uniform, you're the same as us?" "I think I've proven myself in ways you never have," Maria replied. "I think my service record speaks for itself, and I think you're threatened by that." It was the wrong thing to say, or maybe it was the right thing, depending on how you looked at it. Either way, it was the thing that pushed Matthews over the edge. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Matthews stepped forward, his face twisted with rage, and shoved Maria hard in the chest. She stumbled backward, more from surprise than from the force of the push, and felt her back hit the wall of the barracks. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone knew that what had just happened was serious. A male Marine physically attacking a female Marine was not just against regulations. It was criminal. But Matthews didn't seem to care about consequences anymore. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice carrying across the parade ground. "You never have, and you never will. This is a man's world, Rodriguez, and playing dress-up doesn't change that." Maria felt something break inside her chest, but it wasn't her spirit. It was something harder, something that had been holding her back. All the years of trying to fit in, of trying to prove that she belonged, of accepting that she had to work harder and settle for less, all of that crumbled away, leaving behind something fierce and unbreakable. She straightened up, ignoring the pain in her back where she had hit the wall, and looked Matthews directly in the eye. "You're right about one thing," she said. "This is a man's world. But I'm not here to play dress-up. I'm here to show you what a real warrior looks like." Matthews raised his hand again, and Maria braced herself for another shove, another humiliation in front of her fellow Marines. But the blow never came. "That's enough." The voice came from behind Matthews, low and commanding, carrying the kind of authority that made grown men snap to attention. Matthews froze, his hand still raised, and slowly turned around. Standing behind him was Master Chief Petty Officer William Bull Morrison, a Navy SEAL whose reputation preceded him wherever he went. Morrison was in his 40s, with graying hair and scars that told the story of more combat deployments than most people could imagine. He was also one of the few people on the base who commanded universal respect, regardless of branch or rank. "Master Chief," Matthews said, his voice suddenly uncertain, "this is a Marine matter. It concerns me when I see a Marine laying hands on a fellow service member." Morrison interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that came from years of dealing with life and death situations. "It concerns me even more when that Marine is acting like a disgrace to his uniform." Matthews's face went pale. Being called out by Morrison was serious business. The Master Chief had friends in high places, and the kind of influence that could make or break careers. "Step back, Corporal," Morrison said, and there was no question in his voice. It was a command, pure and simple. Matthews stepped back, his hand falling to his side, but Maria could see the rage still burning in his eyes. This wasn't over. If anything, Morrison's intervention had only made it worse. Morrison walked over to Maria, his expression unreadable. She had heard stories about him, how he had served with distinction in Afghanistan and Iraq, how he had saved the lives of countless soldiers, how he commanded respect from everyone who served under him. But she had never spoken to him directly. "You okay, Staff Sergeant?" he asked, his voice gentler than she had expected. "Yes, Master Chief," she replied, standing at attention despite the circumstances. Morrison studied her for a moment, and she felt like he was seeing through all her defenses, all her carefully constructed walls. Then, to her surprise, he smiled. "Good," he said, "because we need to talk." He turned to address the crowd of Marines who had gathered to watch the confrontation. "Show's over, people. Everyone back to their duties." The Marines dispersed quickly, but Maria noticed that Matthews lingered, his eyes fixed on her with an expression that promised this wasn't finished. Morrison noticed too. "Corporal Matthews," the Master Chief said without turning around. "Report to your commanding officer." Now, Matthews left without another word, but Maria could feel his anger following him like a dark cloud. When they were alone, Morrison turned back to Maria. "Walk with me, Staff Sergeant." They walked in silence for a few minutes, heading toward the waterfront where the base met the Pacific Ocean. The morning was warming up, and Maria could hear the distant sound of waves breaking against the shore. "How long has this been going on?" Morrison asked finally. "What, sir? Don't play dumb with me, Rodriguez. I've been around long enough to recognize a pattern when I see one. Matthews has been making your life difficult, hasn't he?" Maria considered her answer carefully. She had learned early in her career that complaining about harassment was often seen as weakness, that the best way to handle problems was to deal with them yourself. "I can handle it, Master Chief," she said. Morrison stopped walking and turned to face her. "That's not what I asked." She met his gaze and saw something there that surprised her. Genuine concern, not the patronizing sympathy she was used to receiving from male superiors. "It's been building for a while," she admitted. "Started small, comments, jokes, little things designed to make me feel like I don't belong. But lately it's been getting worse. And today was the first time he put his hands on you." "Yes, sir." Morrison nodded grimly. "It won't be the last, unless we do something about it." "Sir, I don't want special treatment." "This isn't about special treatment," Morrison interrupted. "This is about maintaining discipline and protecting the integrity of our forces. What Matthews did today was assault, pure and simple. But more than that, it was the action of someone who has forgotten what we're really fighting for." They resumed walking, and Maria found herself opening up to this man in a way that surprised her. Maybe it was his calm demeanor, or maybe it was the fact that he seemed to genuinely care about justice rather than politics. "I joined the Marines because I wanted to serve my country," she said. "I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself, something that mattered. I knew it would be hard, but I thought if I worked hard enough, prove myself enough, I could earn my place." "And have you earned your place?" Maria thought about her service record, the commendations, the successful missions, the respect she had won from most of her fellow Marines. "I thought I had. But lately, I'm starting to wonder if it's even possible." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. "You know what the hardest part of leadership is, Rodriguez?" "No, sir." "Learning that earning respect and commanding respect are two different things. You can earn respect through your actions, through proving yourself over and over again. But commanding respect, that's about understanding your own worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it." They had reached the edge of the base, where the fence met the ocean. Morrison leaned against the railing and looked out at the water. "I've been in the military for 23 years, he said. "I've served with some of the best warriors this country has ever produced. And you know what I've learned? The best ones aren't always the strongest or the fastest or the toughest. The best ones are the ones who understand that strength comes from standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it means standing alone. Especially then." He turned to look at her. "But here's the thing, Rodriguez, you're not alone. What happened today, what Matthews did, that's not acceptable, and it's not something you should have to handle by yourself." Maria felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of tension she hadn't even realized she was carrying. For so long, she had felt like she was fighting this battle by herself, like asking for help would be admitting defeat. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we make sure that this stops. Matthews will face consequences for his actions, and more importantly, we're going to make sure that the culture that allowed this to happen starts to change. And if it doesn't," Morrison's expression hardened, "then we'll deal with that too. But, Rodriguez, I need you to promise me something." "Yes, sir." "Promise me that you won't let them break you. Promise me that you'll keep fighting, not just for yourself, but for all the young Marines who are watching to see if it's possible to stand up and win." Maria thought about Garcia, about the hope in his eyes when she had stood up to Matthews. She thought about all the young women who would follow in her footsteps, who would face the same challenges and the same doubts. "I promise, Master Chief." Morrison smiled, and for the first time since the confrontation, Maria felt like maybe things could change. Maybe she didn't have to fight this battle alone. As they walked back toward the base, Morrison told her about some of the challenges he had faced in his own career, about times when he had to choose between fitting in and doing what was right. He talked about the importance of finding allies, of building networks of support, of never accepting that discrimination was just part of the job. The military is changing, Rodriguez, he said as they reached the main gate. It's not changing fast enough, and it's not changing without a fight, but it is changing. And it's changing because people like you refuse to accept the status quo. People like me? Warriors. Real ones. The kind who understand that the biggest battles aren't always fought with guns and explosives. Sometimes they're fought with courage and integrity and the simple refusal to back down when someone tries to tell you that you don't belong. As they parted ways, Morrison's final words stayed with her. Remember, Rodriguez, your presence here isn't a favor anyone is doing you. It's a gift you're giving to your country. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Walking back to her quarters, Maria felt different than she had that morning. The weight of her uniform no longer felt like a burden. It felt like armor, protection for the battles that lay ahead. Because she knew now that there would be battles. Matthews wasn't going to simply disappear, and the attitudes that had created him weren't going to change overnight. But she also knew that she wasn't fighting alone anymore. Morrison had shown her that there were allies in unexpected places, people who understood that true strength came from standing up for what was right. As she passed the spot where the confrontation had taken place, she saw Garcia waiting for her. The young Marine looked nervous but determined. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," he said, falling in his step beside her. "I wanted to thank you for standing up for me back there." "You don't need to thank me, Garcia. We look out for each other. That's what Marines do." "Yes, ma'am. But I also wanted you to know, if you ever need someone to have your back, you can count on me. What Matthews did was wrong, and there are others who think so too." Maria looked at the young Marine with new appreciation. Maybe the change Morrison had talked about was already beginning, one person at a time. "I'll remember that, Garcia." "And Garcia?" "Yes, ma'am. You do belong here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As Garcia smiled and continued on his way, Maria realized that Morrison had been right about something else. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all of them. Everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, everyone who had ever been pushed around because they were different. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, she felt ready to fight it. The investigation began 3 days after the incident, and Maria quickly learned that formal military justice was a complex beast with its own rules and timelines. She sat in the sterile conference room of the base's legal office, across from Captain Jennifer Walsh, the investigating officer assigned to her case. Captain Walsh was a career military lawyer in her mid-30s, with sharp eyes and an efficient manner that suggested she had handled plenty of similar cases. But as she reviewed the paperwork spread across the table, Maria got the distinct impression that this case was different somehow. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," Captain Walsh began, "I want you to understand that we're taking this incident very seriously. Corporal Matthews has been temporarily relieved of his duties, pending the outcome of this investigation." "Yes, ma'am," Maria replied, maintaining her professional composure despite the mixture of relief and anxiety she felt. "However, I need to be honest with you about what we're up against. Matthews has retained a civilian attorney, and his story differs significantly from yours. He's claiming that the physical contact was minimal, and that you were the one who escalated the situation by challenging his authority in front of junior Marines." Maria felt her stomach drop. She had expected Matthews to deny the severity of what had happened, but hearing it laid out so clinically made her realize how easy it would be for the truth to get twisted. "Captain, there were witnesses. Garcia saw everything, and there were at least 6 other Marines present." "Yes, and we'll be interviewing all of them. But, Rodriguez, I need you to prepare yourself for the possibility that some of those witnesses might not remember things the way you do. Matthews has been stationed here for 4 years. He has relationships, friendships, and loyalties that go back a long way." The implication hung in the air between them. Maria understood. Even if the witnesses had seen what really happened, they might not be willing to testify against a fellow Marine, especially one who had more influence and connections than she did. What about Master Chief Morrison? He saw the aftermath, and he ordered Matthews to report to his commanding officer. Captain Walsh made a note on her legal pad. Morrison's statement will certainly carry weight, but he arrived after the physical altercation occurred. His testimony will be about what he observed afterward, not about the incident itself. Over the next week, Maria watched as her normal routine was disrupted by the investigation process. She was interviewed multiple times, asked to recall every detail of the confrontation, every word that had been spoken. Each time, she told the same story, but she could see in the investigators' eyes that they were looking for inconsistencies, for any crack in her account that could be exploited. Meanwhile, life on the base continued around her, but with a different flavor. Some Marines offered quiet support, a nod in the hallway, a word of encouragement during PT. But others seemed to view her with suspicion, as if she had violated some unspoken code by filing a formal complaint. The worst part was the isolation. During the investigation, she was advised to limit her contact with potential witnesses, which meant avoiding most social interactions. She found herself eating alone, working out alone, and spending her off-duty hours in her quarters with only her thoughts for company. It was during one of these lonely evenings that she received an unexpected visitor. A knock on her door revealed Gunnery Sergeant Lisa Chun, a Marine she knew by reputation but had never spoken to at length. Chun was about 10 years older than Maria, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from surviving and thriving in a male-dominated environment for over a decade. "Mind if I come in, Rodriguez?" Chun asked. "Of course, Gunny. Please." Chun entered and looked around the small quarters, standard military-issue furniture, a few personal photos, and stacks of training manuals. It was the room of someone who lived for the job and didn't have much else. "I heard about what happened with Matthews," Chun said without preamble. "I wanted to talk to you about it." Maria tensed, unsure where this conversation was heading. "I can't really discuss the details, Gunny. The investigation is still ongoing. I'm not here for details. I'm here because I've been where you are, and I know how it feels." Chin sat down on the small chair near Maria's desk, her expression serious but not unkind. 12 years ago, I had my own run-in with a Marine who thought women didn't belong in his corps. Different circumstances, but the same underlying issue. What happened? He made my life hell for months. Started with comments about my appearance, my abilities, my right to be there. Then it escalated to sabotage, equipment that mysteriously malfunctioned, reports that got lost, assignments that put me in impossible positions. Maria felt a chill of recognition. She had experienced some of these things herself, though she had attributed them to bad luck or miscommunication rather than deliberate sabotage. "Did you file a complaint?" Chin's laugh was bitter. "I tried, but back then, the attitude was even worse than it is now. I was told that maybe I was being too sensitive, that maybe I needed to develop thicker skin. The investigation went nowhere, and I was left to deal with the aftermath. I'm sorry, Gani. Don't be sorry. Be smart. That's why I'm here, to make sure you don't make the same mistakes I did." Chun leaned forward, her voice taking on an urgency that commanded attention. "Rodriguez, you've done something I wish I'd been brave enough to do. You stood up publicly with witnesses, and you followed through with a formal complaint. That takes guts. But now comes the hard part." "What do you mean?" "The investigation is just the beginning. Even if Matthews faces consequences, and that's not guaranteed, you're going to have to deal with the fallout. There are people on this base who will see you as a troublemaker, someone who airs dirty laundry instead of handling things quietly. They'll test you, try to break you, see if they can make you quit or transfer." Maria felt overwhelmed by the scope of what Sean was describing. She had focused so much on the investigation that she hadn't thought about what would come after. "So what do I do?" "You remember why you're here. You remember what you're fighting for. And you build alliances with people who share your values." Chin stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the base where both women had carved out their careers despite the obstacles. "There are more of us than you think, Rodriguez. Women who've been through this. Men who believe in fairness and justice. But we don't always make ourselves known because it's safer to keep our heads down. Your case is forcing people to choose sides, and that's both dangerous and necessary. Have you chosen a side, Gunny?" Chin turned back to face her, and Maria saw steel in her eyes. "I chose my side a long time ago. The side of right. That's why I'm here talking to you, instead of staying safely out of it." They talked for another hour, with Chun sharing stories and strategies from her own experiences. She talked about the importance of documentation, of building a paper trail, of never giving anyone ammunition to use against you. But more than tactics, she shared something Maria desperately needed: hope. "It gets better," Chun said as she prepared to leave. "Not quickly, not easily, but it does get better. Every woman who stands up makes it a little easier for the next one." Every man who supports us makes it safer for others to speak up. Change happens one person at a time, one incident at a time. The next morning brought news that both encouraged and worried Maria. Captain Walsh called to inform her that Private Garcia had given a statement that fully supported her version of events. The young Marine had described the confrontation in detail, including Matthews' aggressive behavior and the physical shove. Garcia showed a lot of courage, Captain Walsh said during their phone conversation. I suspect his testimony will be crucial to this case. But the captain's tone suggested there was more to the story. However, I need to inform you that Garcia has requested a transfer to another unit. He's claiming that he needs a fresh start, but it's clear that he's facing pressure because of his decision to support your complaint. Maria felt sick. Garcia was paying a price for doing the right thing, just as she had feared. She thought about their conversation after the incident, about his promise to have her back. Now it seemed that having her back might cost him his career. Is there anything we can do to protect him? We're monitoring the situation, and I've spoken with his commanding officers about ensuring he faces no retaliation. But, Rodriguez, this is exactly what I was worried about. The ripple effects of cases like these can impact everyone involved. That afternoon, Maria sought out Master Chief Morrison. She found him in a training facility, overseeing a group of SEALs running combat drills. He noticed her waiting and called for a brief break. What's on your mind, Staff Sergeant? It's about Garcia, Master Chief. He's requesting a transfer because he's facing pressure for supporting my complaint. Morrison's expression darkened. I was afraid something like this might happen. The same culture that created the problem in the first place doesn't disappear just because there's an investigation. I feel like I've ruined his career. He was just trying to do the right thing. No, Morrison said firmly. Garcia's career is being threatened by people who want to silence witnesses and protect wrongdoers. There's a big difference. They walked to a quieter corner of the facility where they could talk without being overheard. Morrison's voice was low but intense. Rodriguez, I'm going to tell you something that might be hard to hear. This case is bigger than just you and Matthews now. It's become a test of whether this base is serious about its stated values, or whether it's going to continue protecting the old guard at the expense of justice. What do you mean? I mean that there are people in leadership positions who see your complaint as a threat to unit cohesion and morale. They're not necessarily defending Matthews specifically, but they're defending a system that has worked for them and that they don't want to see changed. Maria felt a wave of frustration. So even if we prove that Matthews was wrong, even if he faces consequences, nothing really changes? That depends on how this plays out. If Garcia transfers and you eventually give up fighting, then yes, nothing changes. But if we stand firm and demand accountability, if we show that there are consequences for this kind of behavior, then maybe we can start to shift the culture. Morrison smiled grimly. You didn't think I was going to let you fight this alone, did you? I've been thinking about this situation, and I've decided it's time for me to take a more active role. Over the next few days, Morrison made good on his promise. Maria learned that he had spoken directly with Garcia's commanding officer about the transfer request, making it clear that any retaliation against witnesses would not be tolerated. He had also reached out to other senior leaders, both on the base and higher up the chain of command, to ensure that the investigation was conducted fairly and thoroughly. But Morrison's intervention brought its own complications. Word spread quickly through the base that a Navy SEAL Master Chief was involving himself in a Marine Corps personnel issue. Some saw it as appropriate support for justice. Others viewed it as outside interference. The tension came to a head during a joint training exercise between Marine and Navy units. Maria was participating as a communications specialist when she overheard a conversation between two Marine sergeants that made her blood run cold. This whole thing is getting out of hand, Sergeant First Class Williams was saying to his companion. Now we've got Navy personnel trying to tell us how to run our business. Morrison needs to mind his own damn business, replied Staff Sergeant Brooks. This is between Marines. We can handle our own problems without outside interference. Problem is, Rodriguez isn't handling it like a Marine. Real Marines don't run crying to investigators every time someone hurts their feelings. Maria felt her face flush with anger, but she forced herself to remain hidden and keep listening. You asked me, she's exactly what's wrong with letting women into combat roles. Too emotional, too quick to play the victim card. Matthews probably barely touched her, but she's acting like she was assaulted. Women like her are dangerous, Brooks agreed. They come in here wanting special treatment, wanting us to change everything to accommodate them. Then, when they can't hack it, they blame everyone else. The conversation continued, but Maria had heard enough. She slipped away quietly, her mind racing with anger and hurt. These were her fellow Marines, people she had served alongside, people she had thought respected her. To learn that they saw her as weak, as a troublemaker, as fundamentally different and unwelcome was devastating. But as she walked back to her quarters, she remembered something Sean had told her. The people who are most threatened by change are usually the ones who have benefited most from the current system. Williams and Brooks weren't necessarily bad people, but they were products of a system that had taught them that strength meant never admitting weakness, that loyalty meant protecting your own even when they were wrong, and that change was always a threat to be resisted. That evening, she received a call that changed everything. Captain Walsh's voice was excited but cautious. "Rodriguez, I have some significant news. We've uncovered evidence that Matthews has a pattern of behavior similar to what you described. 2 other female Marines have come forward with complaints about his conduct." Maria's heart raced. "Other complaints? One from last year and another from 2 years ago." Neither was formally reported at the time, but both women have agreed to provide statements about their experiences. This establishes a clear pattern of harassment and intimidation. For the first time since the investigation began, Maria felt like justice might actually be possible. But Captain Walsh's next words tempered her optimism. "However, this also means the case is becoming much more complicated. Matthews' attorney is already arguing that these women are coordinating their stories, that they're part of some kind of conspiracy to destroy his career. We're going to need to be very careful about how we proceed." What does this mean for the timeline? It means the investigation is going to take longer, and it means the scrutiny on all of you is going to intensify. Are you prepared for that? Maria thought about Garcia facing pressure to transfer, about the conversations she had overheard about the long road ahead. Then she thought about Chin's words about making it easier for the next woman, about Morrison's commitment to standing with her, about the importance of not backing down. "Yes, ma'am. I'm prepared." "Good. Because, Rodriguez, I have a feeling this case is going to become a defining moment for this base. How it's handled is going to send a message about what kind of behavior is acceptable and what kind of leadership we really have." After the call ended, Maria sat in her quarters thinking about everything that had led to this moment. A simple decision to stand up for a young Marine had escalated into something much larger, something that would affect not just her career, but potentially the entire culture of the base. She thought about the choice Morrison had described, between earning respect and commanding it. For too long, she had focused on earning respect through her performance, hoping that if she just worked hard enough and proved herself thoroughly enough, she would eventually be accepted. But now she understood that some battles couldn't be won through performance alone. Some battles required taking a stand, demanding accountability, and refusing to accept that discrimination was just part of the job. As she prepared for bed, Maria made a decision that would guide her through the difficult weeks ahead. She wasn't going to fight this battle just to win it. She was going to fight it to make sure that no other Marine, male or female, young or experienced, would have to face what she had faced alone. The investigation was far from over, and she knew the hardest tests were yet to come. But for the first time since Matthews had shoved her against that wall, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not just hope for herself, but hope for the Corps she loved and the values it was supposed to represent. Hope that change was possible, one courageous choice at a time. 3 weeks into the investigation, Maria discovered just how far-reaching the consequences of standing up could be. What had started as a single incident had grown into something that touched every aspect of life on the base, and the pressure was beginning to show on everyone involved. The 2 additional women who had come forward with complaints about Matthews were Staff Sergeant Jennifer Kim and Corporal Sarah Murphy. Maria had worked with both of them, but had never known about their experiences with Matthews. Learning their stories filled her with both rage and guilt, rage at what they had endured, and guilt that she hadn't somehow known and intervened earlier. Staff Sergeant Kim's story was particularly disturbing. 2 years earlier, Matthews had cornered her in a supply room and made explicit comments about what he would like to do to her. When she had tried to leave, he had blocked her path and suggested that her upcoming promotion review might go more smoothly if she was friendlier to him. Kim had never reported the incident because, as she explained to Captain Walsh, I was already fighting for respect in my unit. I couldn't afford to be seen as someone who couldn't handle herself. Corporal Murphy's experience was more recent, but equally troubling. Matthews had repeatedly made comments about her body during PT sessions, suggesting that women Marines were a distraction and liability. When she had finally told him to stop, he had begun finding reasons to give her extra duties and poor performance evaluations. I thought about reporting it. Murphy had told the investigators, but I looked around and didn't see any women in leadership positions who I thought would understand. I felt like I was on my own. The pattern was clear and damning, but as Captain Walsh had predicted, Matthews' defense team was fighting back aggressively. They had hired a civilian attorney known for his aggressive tactics in military cases, and he was already making arguments that painted the women as conspirators seeking to destroy an innocent man's career. They're claiming that you three coordinated your stories, Captain Walsh explained during one of her regular updates with Maria. They're suggesting that this is some kind of feminist plot to target successful male Marines. The accusation stung because it reduced their legitimate grievances to a political agenda. Maria had never thought of herself as a feminist activist. She was simply a Marine who wanted to do her job without facing harassment. How do we fight that narrative? Maria asked, with facts and documentation. The good news is that the timeline of incidents and the consistency of Matthews' behavior patterns make it clear this isn't coordinated. The bad news is that this kind of defense often works because it plays on existing biases and fears. The strain of the investigation was taking its toll on everyone involved. Private Garcia had ultimately decided not to transfer, largely because of Master Chief Morrison's intervention, but he was clearly struggling with the pressure from his peers. Several Marines in his unit had begun ostracizing him, calling him a snitch, and questioning his loyalty. Maria encountered Garcia one evening as they were both leaving the dining facility. He looked tired and stressed, older than his 18 years. "How are you holding up, Garcia?" she asked as they walked across the base. "I'm okay, Staff Sergeant. Just it's harder than I expected." "What's harder?" Garcia was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling with whether to be honest. Finally, he spoke. "I thought I was doing the right thing, supporting your complaint. But now some of the guys in my unit are saying I broke the code that Marines are supposed to handle things internally." Maria felt her heart break a little. Garcia was facing the same impossible choice she had faced between doing what was right and being accepted by his peers. "Garcia, look at me." She stopped walking and turned to face the young Marine. "You did do the right thing. The code they're talking about? It's not about protecting wrongdoers. It's about having each other's backs when it matters. You had my back when it mattered. But what if they never accept me? What if I've ruined my career before it even started?" It was a question Maria couldn't answer with certainty. The military was a small world, and reputations followed people throughout their careers. Garcia's willingness to testify against a senior Marine would be remembered, and not everyone would see it as a positive. "I can't promise you that this won't have consequences," she said honestly. "But I can promise you that the alternative, staying silent when you witnessed an injustice, would have had consequences too. Different ones, but consequences all the same." "What do you mean?" "I mean that every time we stay silent when we witness wrongdoing, we become complicit in it. Every time we choose safety over justice, we make it easier for the next victim to be hurt. You didn't just have my back, Garcia. You had the back of every person who comes after us." As they resumed walking, Garcia seemed to straighten a little. "The Master Chief said something similar when we talked yesterday." "Morrison talked to you?" "Yes, ma'am. He said that real warriors fight for those who can't fight for themselves, and that standing up to bullies is one of the most important battles we'll ever fight." Maria smiled, feeling grateful once again for Morrison's support. But her smile faded as she remembered something Captain Walsh had mentioned during their last meeting. "Garcia, have you been contacted by Matthews' attorney?" The young Marine's expression grew uncomfortable. "Yes, ma'am. He wanted to interview me about what I saw, but the captain told me I don't have to talk to him without the prosecutor present." "Good. Remember that don't let anyone pressure you into changing your story or making statements without proper representation." The next day brought a development that shifted the entire dynamic of the case. Maria was called to Captain Walsh's office for an emergency meeting, where she found not just the captain, but also Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base's commanding officer. Colonel Hayes was a formidable woman in her early 50s who had built her career during an era when female Marines faced even greater obstacles than they did now. Maria had never spoken with her directly, but her reputation for fairness and toughness was well known throughout the base. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Colonel Hayes began without preamble. I want you to know that this investigation has my full attention and support. What you've described and what the other complainants have reported represents exactly the kind of behavior that undermines military discipline and effectiveness. Thank you, Colonel. However, I also need to inform you that this case has attracted attention beyond our base. The media has somehow gotten wind of the story, and there are reporters asking questions about our handling of sexual harassment complaints. Maria felt her stomach drop. Media attention was the last thing she had wanted. It would only increase the pressure on everyone involved and potentially turn her into a public symbol rather than just a Marine seeking justice. How did the media find out? Captain Walsh answered, "We're not sure, but military cases like this sometimes attract attention, especially when they involve questions about gender integration and military culture. The important thing is that we control the narrative and ensure that the investigation proceeds according to proper procedures." Colonel Hayes leaned forward. "Rodriguez, I'm going to ask you a difficult question, and I need you to answer it honestly. Are you prepared for this case to become public? Are you ready for your name and your story to potentially become part of a national conversation about women in the military?" The question caught Maria off guard. She had never thought about her case in those terms. To her, it was simply about holding one Marine accountable for his actions. The idea that it might become a symbol or a cause was overwhelming. I'm not sure, Colonel. I never wanted this to be about anything more than what happened that day. I understand that, and I respect it. But, unfortunately, we don't always get to control how our actions are perceived or used by others. The question is whether you're prepared to see this through, regardless of the external pressure. Maria thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. Matthews' shove, Morrison's support, Garcia's courage, Kim and Murphy's willingness to come forward. She thought about all the young Marines who would face similar situations in the future. "Yes, Colonel, I'm prepared to see this through." "Good, because I'm about to tell you something that will require even more courage than you've already shown." Colonel Hayes exchanged a look with Captain Walsh before continuing. "Based on the evidence gathered so far, we're recommending that Matthews face a court-martial. This means the case will be tried in open court with testimony from all witnesses, including you." The implications hit Maria immediately. A court-martial would be public, formal, and permanent. It would put her testimony on the record forever and subject her to aggressive cross-examination by Matthews' defense attorney. "What are the chances of conviction?" she asked. "Based on the evidence and the testimony of witnesses, Captain Walsh believes we have a strong case. But you should know that Matthews' attorney is already preparing a vigorous defense. They're going to challenge your credibility, your motivations, and your version of events." Captain Walsh added, "They're also likely to bring up your service record, looking for any incidents or evaluations that could be used to suggest you're not a reliable witness." Maria felt a chill. Her service record was strong, but like any Marine, she had faced challenges and setbacks along the way. The thought of having every aspect of her career scrutinized and potentially distorted was daunting. "There's something else," Colonel Hayes continued. "Given the nature of this case and the attention it's receiving, I'm temporarily reassigning you to an administrative position while the court-martial proceeds. This is for your protection and to ensure that there's no appearance of retaliation or interference." The reassignment felt like a punishment, even though Maria understood the reasoning. Being pulled from her regular duties and placed in an administrative role would be seen by many as evidence that she was somehow damaged goods, a troublemaker who couldn't be trusted with normal responsibilities. "How long will the reassignment last?" "Until the court-martial is concluded and you're ready to return to full duties. It could be several months." As the meeting concluded, Maria felt overwhelmed by the scope of what lay ahead. What had started as a simple decision to stand up for herself and a fellow Marine had grown into something that would affect her life for months to come. Walking back to her quarters, she was surprised to find Master Chief Morrison waiting for her. His expression was serious, but supportive. "I heard about the court-martial decision," he said. "How are you feeling about it?" "Honestly, terrified. This isn't what I expected when I filed the complaint." Morrison nodded. It never is. But, Rodriguez, I want you to understand something important. You're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're fighting for the integrity of the entire system. That's a lot of pressure. It is. But it's also an opportunity to make real change. Court-martials like this one send a message throughout the military about what kind of behavior will and won't be tolerated. They walked in silence for a few minutes before Morrison spoke again. I want you to know that you're not alone in this fight. There are more people supporting you than you realize, but many of them can't speak publicly because of their positions or because they're afraid of retaliation. Like who? Officers who have daughters they want to see serve without facing harassment. Senior enlisted personnel who are tired of dealing with problems created by people like Matthews. Even some Marines you might not expect. People who understand that unit cohesion is actually strengthened when everyone feels safe and respected. As they reached her building, Morrison turned to face her. Rodriguez, I'm going to tell you something I learned during my first deployment in Afghanistan. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones that happen at home, the ones that determine what kind of organization we're going to be. What do you mean? I mean that defeating external enemies is relatively easy compared to defeating the internal forces that undermine our values. Matthews isn't just one bad Marine. He's a symptom of a culture that has tolerated and sometimes rewarded the kind of behavior you experienced. Morrison's words stayed with Maria as she prepared for the long legal battle ahead. Over the next few days, she began to understand just how complex and difficult the court-martial process would be. Captain Walsh assigned her a victim advocate, Lieutenant Sarah Chun, no relation to Gunnery Sergeant Chun, who would help her navigate the legal proceedings and understand her rights. Lieutenant Chun was a young officer with a background in military law, and she immediately began preparing Maria for what to expect. The defense attorney is going to try to make this about your character rather than Matthews's actions, Lieutenant Chun explained during their first meeting. They'll suggest that you're overly sensitive, that you misinterpreted innocent interactions, or that you have some kind of agenda against male Marines. How do I defend against that? By sticking to the facts and telling your story clearly and consistently. Don't let them bait you into emotional responses or defensive explanations. Just tell the truth about what happened and let the evidence speak for itself. Lieutenant Chen also warned her about the isolation that often accompanied high-profile cases like this one. You're going to find that some people who were friendly before will start avoiding you. It's not necessarily because they don't support you, but because they're afraid of being associated with controversy. The warning proved prophetic. Over the next week, Maria noticed a subtle but unmistakable change in how people interacted with her. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Invitations to social gatherings dried up. Even some Marines who had previously been friendly began treating her with professional politeness rather than genuine warmth. The isolation was painful, but it also clarified something important for Maria. She began to understand that her fight wasn't just about Matthews. It was about changing a culture that made people choose between their careers and their consciences, between fitting in and standing up for what was right. One evening, as she sat alone in her quarters reviewing the case materials Lieutenant Chen had provided, she received an unexpected visitor. Gunnery Sergeant Chen knocked on her door, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a grim expression. "Thought you might need some company," Chen said as she entered. "Thanks, Gunny. I didn't realize how lonely this process would be." It always is. That's part of how the system protects itself, by isolating anyone who challenges it. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Chen spoke again. "Rodriguez, I need to tell you something. There are rumors going around about Matthews's defense strategy." "What kind of rumors?" "Word is that his attorney is planning to argue that you initiated the confrontation because you were romantically interested in Matthews and angry that he rejected you." Maria felt like she had been punched in the stomach. "That's completely false. I've never had any personal interest in Matthews beyond professional interaction. I know that, and anyone who knows you knows that. But it's a common defense strategy in cases like this. Turn the victim into the aggressor. Suggest that the complaint is motivated by personal animosity rather than genuine grievance." The ugliness of the allegation was breathtaking. Not only would it require her to defend herself against a completely fabricated accusation, but it would also play into every stereotype about women Marines being emotionally unstable and unprofessional. How do I fight something like that? With the truth and with witnesses who can testify to your character and professionalism. The good news is that your service record speaks for itself, and the testimony from Kim and Murphy establishes a pattern that has nothing to do with romantic rejection. Chen's visit reminded Maria that she wasn't completely alone, but it also prepared her for just how brutal the court-martial was likely to be. As she prepared for bed that night, she thought about everything that had led to this moment and everything that lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new pressures, and new tests of her resolve. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, she felt something approaching peace. Not because the battle was easy, but because she was finally ready to fight it with everything she had. The court-martial began on a gray Monday morning in February, with the kind of cold, steady rain that seemed to match the mood hanging over the base. Maria sat in the courtroom, wearing her dress blues and trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. Across the room, Corporal Matthews sat with his defense attorney, looking every inch the professional Marine who had somehow been wrongfully accused. The military courtroom was formal and imposing, with the American flag and Marine Corps colors flanking the judge's bench. Colonel Robert Morrison, no relation to Master Chief Morrison, presided as the military judge, while Major Thomas Anderson served as the prosecutor and civilian attorney David Brennan represented Matthews. Major Anderson had prepared Maria extensively for this moment, but sitting in the courtroom as the proceedings began, she felt the weight of everything that had led to this point. In the gallery behind her, she could see a mixture of supporters and observers, some friendly faces like Gunnery Sergeant Chun and Lieutenant Chun, but also Marines whose expressions ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. "The government will prove," Major Anderson said in his opening statement, "that Corporal Matthews engaged in a pattern of harassment and assault against female Marines under his supervision. This is not a case about miscommunication or hurt feelings. This is a case about a Marine who repeatedly violated the trust placed in him and the standards expected of all service members." When it was his turn, Attorney Brennan painted a very different picture. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about a successful Marine whose career is being destroyed by false allegations from women who have coordination their stories to target him. The evidence will show that Corporal Matthews is the victim here, the victim of a coordinated attack designed to advance a political agenda." As the opening statements concluded, Maria realized that this trial would be about much more than the facts of what had happened that day. It would be a battle over competing narratives about military culture, gender integration, and the nature of harassment itself. The prosecution's case began with Private Garcia's testimony. The young Marine had grown more confident in the months since the incident, but Maria could see the nervousness in his posture as he took the stand. "Private Garcia, please tell the court what you witnessed on the morning of November 15th, Major Anderson began. Garcia's testimony was clear and detailed. He described the confrontation between Matthews and himself, Maria's intervention, and the escalation that followed. Most importantly, he provided a first-hand account of Matthews shoving Maria against the barracks wall. There was no question in my mind that Corporal Matthews physically assaulted Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Garcia said firmly. He pushed her hard enough that she stumbled backward and hit the wall. Under cross-examination, Brennan tried to shake Garcia's testimony, suggesting that his view might have been obstructed, that the incident happened quickly, and that he might be misremembering details. But Garcia held firm, clearly and consistently describing what he had witnessed. "Private Garcia," Brennan said in his most aggressive tone, "isn't it true that you've been promised special treatment in exchange for your testimony against Corporal Matthews?" "No, sir. No one has promised me anything except that I should tell the truth about what I saw." "And isn't it true that you've been coached by the prosecution on what to say?" "No, sir. I've been asked to tell the truth, and that's what I'm doing." Garcia's testimony was followed by Staff Sergeant Kim and Corporal Murphy, who described their own experiences with Matthews. Kim's account of the supply room incident was particularly powerful, delivered in a steady voice that carried the weight of someone who had carried this burden for too long. "He made it clear that my career advancement depended on my willingness to submit to his advances," Kim testified. "When I refused and tried to leave, he blocked my path and told me I was making a mistake." Murphy's testimony about the pattern of harassment during PT sessions painted Matthews as someone who used his position of authority to intimidate and belittle female Marines. Her description of the retaliation she faced after confronting him helped establish the same pattern that Maria had experienced. But The defense was ready for these witnesses. Brennan's cross-examinations were aggressive and personal, suggesting that each woman had her own reasons for wanting to see Matthews' career destroyed. Staff Sergeant Kim, Brennan said during his cross-examination, "Isn't it true that you received a poor performance evaluation from Corporal Matthews' unit shortly before you decided to come forward with these allegations? The evaluation was unfair and based on, just answer the question, please. Did you or did you not receive a poor performance evaluation?" "Yes, but thank you." "And isn't it true that you blamed Corporal Matthews for that evaluation?" The questioning continued in this vein, with Brennan skillfully creating doubt about each witness's motivations while avoiding the substance of their allegations. Maria watched from the witness waiting area, feeling increasingly frustrated by the defense attorney's tactics. When it was her turn to testify, Maria had been waiting for over 3 days. The delay had given her time to observe the defense strategy and prepare herself for what was coming, but it had also allowed her anxiety to build. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Major Anderson began gently, "Please tell the court about your military service and your assignment to this base." Maria described her career, her training, and her responsibilities, establishing her credibility as a professional Marine. She talked about her performance evaluations, her commendations, and her reputation among her peers. "Now, please tell the court about your relationship with Corporal Matthews prior to November 15th. "We had a professional relationship only. Our units worked together occasionally, but we had no personal interaction beyond what was required by our duties." "Did you ever have romantic feelings toward Corporal Matthews?" "Absolutely not." "Did you ever make any romantic overtures toward him?" "No, never." Major Anderson then led her through the events of November 15th, from her initial observation of the confrontation with Garcia through Matthews' physical assault on her. Maria's testimony was clear and consistent, matching what she had told investigators months earlier. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, when Corporal Matthews pushed you, what went through your mind? "I was shocked. I couldn't believe that a fellow Marine would physically assault me for standing up for another Marine. It felt like a violation of everything we're supposed to stand for." "How did the incident affect you personally?" "It made me question whether I really belonged in the Corps, whether all my efforts to prove myself had been meaningless. It felt like no matter what I accomplished, there would always be people who saw me as less than a real Marine." Under cross-examination, Brennan immediately went on the attack. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, "Isn't it true that you initiated the confrontation with Corporal Matthews?" "I intervened when I saw him harassing Private Garcia. I wouldn't call that initiating a confrontation." "But you challenged his authority in front of junior Marines, didn't you?" "I pointed out that Private Garcia had earned his place in the Corps, yes." "And you did so in an aggressive and disrespectful manner?" "I spoke firmly but respectfully." Brennan's questioning continued for hours, covering every aspect of Maria's military career and personal life. He suggested that she was overly sensitive, that she had a history of conflict with male Marines, and that she was using false allegations to advance her own career. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, "Isn't it true that you've always resented male Marines who were more successful than you?" "That's not true." "Isn't it true that you've complained multiple times about not receiving promotions as quickly as your male counterparts?" "I've advocated for myself when I believed I was qualified for advancement, but I've never made it about gender." "But you do believe that male Marines have advantages that you don't have, correct?" The question was a trap, and Maria recognized it. If she said yes, it would support the defense's argument that she was motivated by resentment. If she said no, it would contradict obvious realities about military culture. "I believe that all Marines should be evaluated on their merits, regardless of gender." Sometimes that hasn't been the case. "So you do believe you've been discriminated against?" "I believe there have been times when my gender has affected how others perceived my capabilities." Brennan spent considerable time trying to establish that Maria had romantic feelings for Matthews that were rejected, leading to her false accusations. Despite the complete lack of evidence for this theory, he pursued it aggressively. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, "Isn't it true that you made advances toward Corporal Matthews at the base Christmas party?" "Absolutely not. I barely spoke to him at the Christmas party." "Witnesses will testify that they saw you seeking him out, trying to engage him in conversation." "I spoke to many people at the party. Any conversation with Corporal Matthews was purely professional. And when he showed no interest in pursuing a personal relationship with you, you became angry, didn't you?" "No. because there was never any attempt at a personal relationship. The cross-examination was exhausting and demoralizing. Brennan's questions were designed not just to challenge her testimony, but to attack her character and motivations. Several times, Major Anderson objected to the line of questioning, but Colonel Morrison generally allowed the defense considerable latitude. By the time Maria stepped down from the witness stand, she felt like she had been through a battle. But the trial was far from over. The defense's case began with character witnesses from Matthews, Marines who testified to his professionalism, his leadership abilities, and his positive relationships with female Marines. Several women testified that Matthews had always treated them with respect and had never made inappropriate comments or advances. Corporal Matthews was always professional in his interactions with me, testified Staff Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez, no relation to Maria. I never saw him treat female Marines differently than male Marines. The defense also presented evidence suggesting that Maria, Kim, and Murphy had all experienced career disappointments that could have motivated them to make false accusations. They introduced performance evaluations, assignment requests, and promotion timelines to suggest that each woman had reasons to resent Matthews or the system he represented. But the most dramatic moment came when Matthews himself took the stand. He presented himself as a dedicated Marine whose career was being destroyed by false allegations from women who were angry about their own professional setbacks. "I have never harassed any female Marine," Matthews testified. "I have always treated every Marine under my supervision with respect and fairness, regardless of gender." "Did you assault Staff Sergeant Rodriguez on November 15th? Brennan asked. "Absolutely not. There was a verbal disagreement, but I never laid a hand on her." "How would you characterize your interaction with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez that day?" "She was aggressive and disrespectful, challenging my authority in front of junior Marines. I spoke firmly to her about maintaining proper military bearing, but I never made physical contact." Under cross-examination, Major Anderson pressed Matthews about his version of events and about his relationships with the other complainants. "Corporal Matthews, you testified that you never made physical contact with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. Are you saying that Private Garcia lied under oath?" "I think Private Garcia may have misinterpreted what he saw, or he may have been influenced by Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's version of events." "So Private Garcia, Staff Sergeant Kim, and Corporal Murphy all independently decided to lie about their experiences with you?" "I think they coordinated their stories to support each other's false allegations." "And what would motivate 3 Marines to risk their careers by making false accusations?" "To advance a political agenda about women in the military." The prosecution's cross-examination revealed inconsistencies in Matthews' story and highlighted his inability to explain why 3 different women would independently accuse him of similar behavior. But he maintained his innocence throughout, presenting himself as a victim of false accusations. As the trial neared its conclusion, both sides presented closing arguments that summarized their competing narratives about what had really happened and what it meant for the future of the Corps. "This case is about accountability," Major Anderson told the jury. "It's about whether we will tolerate a culture where female Marines face harassment and assault, or whether we will hold those responsible for such behavior accountable for their actions. This case is about the destruction of an innocent Marine's career," Brennan countered. "It's about false accusations motivated by personal grievances and political agendas. Corporal Matthews is the real victim here." As the jury deliberated, Maria waited with a mixture of hope and dread. She had done everything she could to tell her story clearly and honestly, but she knew that the outcome was far from certain. Military juries were composed of Marines, and their decision would reflect not just the evidence, but also their beliefs about military culture and gender integration. The deliberation lasted 2 days, long enough to suggest that the jury was taking their responsibilities seriously, but also long enough to increase Maria's anxiety about the outcome. When word came that the jury had reached a verdict, she felt her heart race with anticipation and fear. Walking back into the courtroom for the final time, Maria looked around at the faces that had become familiar over the past 2 weeks. Some showed support, others skepticism, but all reflected the understanding that this verdict would have implications far beyond the specific charges against Matthews. Colonel Morrison called the court to order, and the jury foreman, a gunnery sergeant with over 15 years of service, stood to deliver the verdict. On the charge of assault, we find the defendant guilty. The words hit Maria like a physical blow, not because they were unexpected, but because they represented validation of everything she had endured to reach this moment. Around the courtroom, she could see various reactions: relief from her supporters, shock from Matthews' allies, and professional acceptance from the court personnel. On the charge of harassment, we find the defendant guilty. The second verdict was equally important, establishing that Matthews' pattern of behavior constituted criminal conduct rather than simple poor judgment. As the judge moved to sentencing, Maria felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that justice had been served, sadness that it had taken so much effort and pain to achieve, and hope that this verdict might make things easier for the next woman who faced similar challenges. Matthews was sentenced to reduction in rank, forfeiture of pay, and dismissal from the Marine Corps. It was a severe punishment that reflected the seriousness of his crimes and sent a clear message about the consequences of harassment and assault. But for Maria, the verdict was just the beginning of a new chapter in her military career and her life. The trial had changed her, not just how others saw her, but how she saw herself and her role in the Corps she loved. As she left the courtroom that day, supported by the friends and allies who had stood with her throughout the ordeal, she knew that the real work was just beginning. Changing a culture would take more than one court-martial, more than one conviction, more than one woman's willingness to stand up and fight. But it was a start. 6 months after the court-martial, Maria Rodriguez stood on the same parade ground where a confrontation with Matthews had taken place. But everything had changed. The base looked the same, the routines continued as they always had, but the undercurrents of military life had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. She was no longer Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, having been promoted to Gunnery Sergeant in recognition of her exemplary service and leadership during one of the most challenging periods in the base's recent history. The promotion had come with a new assignment. She was now the senior enlisted advisor for the base's new sexual harassment and assault prevention program. It wasn't a role she had sought, but it was one that Colonel Hayes had convinced her to accept. Rodriguez, the colonel had said during their meeting about the position, "You have unique credibility and experience that can help us make real changes. The Corps needs leaders who understand these issues from personal experience." The program was ambitious in scope, designed to address not just individual incidents of harassment, but the broader cultural factors that allowed such behavior to flourish. Maria found herself working with officers and enlisted personnel from across the base, developing training programs, support systems, and reporting procedures that would make it easier for future victims to come forward. But the real change she had learned happened in smaller moments and individual interactions. Like her conversation with Private First Class Amanda Torres, a young Marine who had approached her after a training session the previous week. "Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez," Torres had said nervously, "I was wondering if I could talk to you about something." They had found a quiet corner of the training facility, and Torres had described a situation that was painfully familiar: a sergeant who made inappropriate comments, who used his position of authority to make her uncomfortable, who had begun escalating his behavior in ways that made her afraid. "I keep thinking about what you went through," Torres had said, "about how hard it was. I don't know if I'm strong enough to go through something like that." Maria had looked at the young Marine, barely 20 years old, trying to build a career in an institution that still struggled with these issues, and felt the weight of responsibility that came with her new role. "Torres," she had said gently, "it's not about being strong enough to go through what I went through. It's about being strong enough to make sure you don't have to go through it alone." The conversation had led to a formal complaint against Torres' sergeant, but this time the process was different. The new procedures Maria had helped develop ensured that Torres had an advocate from the beginning, that the investigation was thorough and fair, and that she faced no retaliation for coming forward. The sergeant was ultimately transferred and faced administrative punishment, but more importantly, Torres never had to endure months of isolation and uncertainty. The system, while still imperfect, was learning to respond more quickly and effectively to these situations. Not all the changes were immediately visible. Maria still encountered Marines who viewed her with suspicion, who saw her as someone who had betrayed the traditional military values of handling problems internally. But she also met many others who expressed gratitude. Women who told her that her courage had inspired them to speak up about their own experiences, and Men who said the trial had opened their eyes to problems they hadn't previously understood. Master Chief Morrison remained one of her strongest allies and supporters. He had been instrumental in helping her navigate the transition back to normal duties after the trial, and his continued presence on the base provided a powerful example of senior leadership commitment to change. You know what I'm most proud of? Morrison asked during one of their regular conversations as they walked along the waterfront. It's not just that Matthews faced consequences, it's that we created a model for how to handle these situations going forward. What do you mean? I mean that we proved it's possible to seek justice without destroying the unit, to hold people accountable without undermining military discipline. Other bases are studying how we handled this case, using it as an example of best practices. Maria appreciated Morrison's perspective, but she also knew that change was slow and uneven. For every success story like Torres's case, there were probably others where women still chose silence over the risk of confrontation. The most unexpected development had been her relationship with Private Garcia. The young Marine who had shown such courage in testifying had grown into a confident and respected member of his unit. But more than that, he had become something of a leader among junior Marines on issues of respect and inclusion. Gunnery Sergeant Garcia had told her during a recent encounter, "I wanted you to know that I've been talking to some of the newer Marines about what happened, about why it was important to speak up." What do you tell them? I tell them that real courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing the right thing even when you're scared. And I tell them that standing up for each other is what makes us Marines, not staying silent when we see wrongdoing. Garcia's evolution reminded Maria that the impact of their case extended beyond the specific individuals involved. It had created a ripple effect throughout the base.